In 1870, gold transformed a remote valley in New Mexico into a booming Wild West town. On its only road, travelers kept vanishing. At the center stood a quiet cabin run by Charles Kennedy and his 14-year-old bride, miles from law or mercy. The horrors hidden inside that cabin would turn even hardened gunfighters into legends and leave behind a ghost town forever marked by fear. What really happened on the Taos Trail? And why did it take a blood-soaked escape to reveal the face of a serial killer no court dared to punish? The Moreno Valley in the 1860s was a place of brutal contrasts. High desert plains gave way to mountains rising over 12,000 feet, where winter could kill a man overnight. For centuries, the land was nearly empty. Just a few scattered ranches, Ute camps, and the distant outpost of Taos. That changed in 1866 when a Ute Indian arrived at Fort Union with a chunk of copper ore. Soldiers traced the find to Baldy Mountain and, in the creek below, panned out gold. Word spread fast. In a matter of months, Elizabethtown, known as E-Town, exploded from nothing into a roaring boomtown with 7,000 people squeezed into a narrow valley. 7 saloons, 5 stores, 3 dance halls, and tents stacked shoulder to shoulder. It was the first incorporated town in New Mexico, and every ounce of gold, every barrel of flour, every miner and gambler had to move along one single road. The route twisted over Palo Flechado Pass, a lonely stretch where snow could bury the trail and bandits watched from the timber. There was no telegraph, no law, and no backup. Travelers had no choice but to trust the strangers they met along the way. A single cabin at the base of the pass became their only shelter for miles, a place that promised warmth and rest, but hid a risk no one saw coming. In this landscape, the mountains themselves seemed to conspire against the living, funneling thousands of desperate men through one narrow bottleneck, where the difference between fortune and disappearance could be measured by a single stop on the trail. Charles Kennedy arrived in New Mexico after the Civil War, a stranger among strangers. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a Tennessee accent and a quick temper. In the winter of 1867, he stood at the altar of Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe Church in Taos, marrying Maria Gregoria Cortez. She was just 14 years old, barely more than a child herself. Kennedy was 28. Their union was recorded in the parish ledger, a brief note in ink that gave no hint at the life waiting on the other side of the mountains. They built their home at the base of Palo Flechado Pass, where the single road from Taos to Elizabethtown wound through the trees. The cabin doubled as a way station, offering food, whiskey, and a bed to travelers braving the pass. For miles in any direction, there was nothing but forest and snow. No lawmen patrolled this stretch, no telegraph wires carried news, and no sheriff rode the trail. The only authority came from the man who owned the house. Inside, the rooms were cramped and cold, warmed by a fire that never seemed to burn out. Gregoria kept to the shadows, tending to chores, and the baby born 2 years after their wedding. She watched strangers come and go, miners with gold dust, drifters with stories, men who trusted the promise of shelter. Each night, the pass funneled the world to their door, and each night the cabin stood as the last outpost before the darkness closed in. For those who stopped, the difference between safety and disappearance was measured by Kennedy's mood and Gregoria's silence. The cabin at Palo Flechado Pass became a place where death was woven into daily life. Travelers arrived with dust on their boots and hope for a warm meal. Gregoria greeted them with quiet eyes, serving bread and coffee while her husband watched from the shadows. Some men finished supper and went to bed by the fire, never to wake again. Charles Kennedy waited until the lamps were out. A single gunshot, a blade in the dark, or the heavy crack of an iron tool, each method left little noise for the wind to carry away. He stripped the dead of gold dust and coins, then dragged the bodies across the floorboards. Gregoria swept the ashes from the hearth each morning, knowing what had burned there the night before. The smell of scorched bone lingered in the walls, mixing with the smoke that warmed their only child. Samuel was born in June 1869, a living witness to horrors he could not understand. Gregoria nursed him by the fire, listening to Kennedy's boots thud overhead as he buried another stranger beneath the house. She learned to keep her voice low, her head down, and her secrets locked inside. Each day followed the last, a meal, a murder, a fire, the hush of fear. Outside, the mountains pressed in. Inside, the only law was silence. Stories about the Kennedy cabin have always blurred the line between fact and legend. For years, people claimed Charles Kennedy's wife was a Ute woman named Rosa, a detail repeated in dime novels and ghost town tours. But church records uncovered by historian Loretta Miles Tollefson tell a different story. Her name was Maria Gregoria Cortez, a 14-year-old from Ranchos de Taos. She was not a mysterious outsider, but a local girl whose life was written in parish ink. The same tension runs through every account of what happened in that cabin. Some say Gregoria escaped through the front door while Kennedy slept off his rage. Others insist she squeezed up the soot-choked chimney, scraping her skin raw on the stone. No one can prove which version is true. The cabin itself vanished long ago, leaving no floorboards to check for secret doors, no hearth to measure for a body's passage. Even the most dramatic moments, like the toddler's chilling words over supper or the 15-mile barefoot flight, are tangled in retellings. The facts that remain are stark. A teenage wife, battered and terrified, saw everything. She alone knew the truth buried under the floor. As the next evening closed in, a stranger's innocent question at the dinner table would push those secrets into the open, and the story would finally break loose from the shadows. A single sentence shattered years of silence inside Kennedy's cabin. As the traveler asked about danger on the trail, little Samuel looked up from his mother's lap and said, "Can't you smell the one Papa put under the floor?" The words hung in the smoky air, and an instant later, gunfire split the night. Kennedy shot the traveler where he sat, then turned on his own son in a drunken rage. When the house fell quiet, Gregoria was left alone in the dark, locked inside with two bodies and a man who would kill her if she made a sound. She waited for his breathing to slow, then slipped out. Some say by the door, others say through the narrow chimney, scraping her skin raw on the way up. She emerged into the freezing dark, barefoot, blood and soot streaking her arms and legs, the mountain wind cutting through her thin dress. For 15 miles she pushed through snow and blackness, stumbling toward the lights of Elizabethtown. By the time she burst into the saloon, her feet were torn and her voice was nearly gone. But she spoke the truth no one else dared, and the men inside listened. Clay Allison, already a legend for his temper and his gun, stood up and called for horses. Within minutes, a posse was forming. The trail of blood and fear that began in a mountain cabin was about to lead straight into town, and the law would have to catch up if it could. On October 3, 1870, Charles Kennedy sat before a judge in Elizabethtown. The evidence was overwhelming. Eyewitness testimony, human bones pulled from the ashes, bodies found exactly where Gregoria had described. Yet the court refused to deliver a verdict. Rumors spread that Kennedy's lawyer was ready to buy his freedom, feeding old suspicions about the Santa Fe ring and its grip on Colfax County justice. The townspeople had seen this before, killers walking free while the law looked the other way. 3 days later, the patience of Elizabethtown snapped. In the middle of the night, armed men stormed the building where Kennedy was held. Some say Clay Allison led them, others claim the mob acted as one. They dragged Kennedy into the street. The stories split here. Some tell of a hanging, others tell of a rope tied to a horse, the body pulled until the head came free. What is certain is that Kennedy was found headless, his corpse denied a grave inside the Catholic cemetery. The legend grew that Allison carried the severed head 29 miles south to Cimarron and mounted it on a stake outside Lambert's Inn. Today, that building stands as the St. James Hotel, scarred by violence. 22 bullet holes still mark the ceiling, silent reminders of a time when justice came from the barrel of a gun and the edge of a blade. Frontier justice left no records, only scars, and today the line between legend and fact blurs with every retelling. When legal systems fail, communities improvise consequences. The question now: who writes justice when the law is silent? Some stories vanish, others echo in the silence we choose. Share your thoughts below.